Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into the California workers' comp system. You've given us some great sources that focus on how this whole system is kept in check. It's all about compliance and enforcement, making sure everyone plays by the rules. We'll uncover some surprising details, like how often different groups get audited and what happens if they don't follow the rules.
It's a fascinating area. Think of it like a web of checks and balances, ensuring fairness for injured workers, employers, and medical providers alike.
Okay, let's unpack this. We'll start by following the journey of a hypothetical injured worker. Say you've been injured on the job, you file a claim, and it lands on the desk of a claims administrator. Now, these claims administrators are the ones managing your case. But here's the catch. They're under constant scrutiny.
That's right. The DWC's Audit and Enforcement Unit audits them every 5 years. They don't just skim the surface either. They dive deep into a random sample of requests for authorization.
Hold on, back up for a second. Requests for authorization, what exactly are those?
Good point. Imagine your doctor recommends physical therapy for your injury. That recommendation needs to be authorized by the claims administrator before you can actually start those sessions. The audit looks at whether these authorizations are being handled accurately and promptly, both for the injured workers' treatment and for the medical provider's payments.
So it's like a watchdog making sure the system isn't getting bogged down or that folks aren't being denied necessary care. And what happens if a claims administrator fails this audit? Do they get a slap on the wrist?
It's more serious than that. Failing a routine investigation can trigger targeted investigations by the DWC, potentially leading to some hefty penalties. And it doesn't stop there. Anyone can file a complaint against a claims administrator. You, your employer, a medical provider. If the DWC finds the complaint credible, they'll investigate that too.
Wow, so there's a lot of pressure on these claims administrators to do things by the book. Now, let's say your claim involves a treatment request that gets a little more complicated. That's where utilization review organizations or UROs come in, right?
Precisely. UROs are the gatekeepers for treatment requests. Their job is to review requests from doctors and decide whether the recommended treatment is medically necessary. It's a crucial role, and it comes with its own set of checks and balances.
So the URO is basically saying yay or nay to what your doctor thinks you need. That sounds like a lot of power. Are they audited as well?
Absolutely. Every 3 years, each URO undergoes a rigorous investigation. The DWC wants to ensure these decisions are being made promptly, in line with the regulations, and that everyone involved, you, your doctor, the claims administrator, receives proper communication about the decision.
So it's not just about the decision itself, but the entire process surrounding it? That makes sense. But what happens if they mess up? Is it the same song and dance as with claims administrators?
Pretty much. Failing a routine investigation can lead to targeted investigations and potential penalties. The DWC takes these audits very seriously because they want to ensure a level playing field and that injured workers are receiving the appropriate care. Now, once the treatment is approved, you'll need to find doctors and facilities within the workers' comp system, which is where medical provider networks and healthcare organizations come into play. These are often shortened to MPNs and HCOs.
Right, these are the networks where injured workers can find doctors and facilities to get the treatment they need. But what's the difference between an MPN and an HCO? They seem to be doing the same thing.
That's a great question. They both provide networks of medical providers, but they have different structures and are regulated differently. MPNs are established by insurance companies and employers to provide a network of physicians for their employees. They focus on work-related injuries. HCOs, on the other hand, are broader in scope. They're licensed by the state and can include a wider range of providers, serving both injured workers and the general public.
Okay, so MPNs are more specialized for work injuries, while HCOs cast a wider net. Got it. But I'm guessing there are rules about who can be part of these networks. What are the benchmarks for approval and certification?
To get the DWC stamp of approval, both MPNs and HCOs have to meet some strict requirements. Think sufficient numbers of physicians across various specialties, making sure these doctors are geographically accessible to the workers, keeping their provider lists up to date, and having clear procedures for notifying employees about the network.
That sounds pretty rigorous, so it's like they're going through a vetting process to ensure quality and accessibility for injured workers.
Exactly, and there are consequences for noncompliance. If an MPN or HCO doesn't meet these requirements, their application can be rejected, or their approval or certification can be revoked. The DWC is really emphasizing the importance of a well-structured and accessible network for injured workers.
It makes sense. No one wants to jump through hoops when they're already dealing with an injury. But what happens if there's a dispute about your medical evaluation or treatment? Let's say you and the claims administrator disagree about what's medically necessary. That's where qualified medical evaluators or QMEs step in, right?
Exactly. QMEs are licensed physicians who provide expert opinions on medical issues related to your workers' compensation claim. They act as independent medical referees, helping to resolve disputes. And their conduct is closely monitored by the DWC Medical Unit.
So if there's a disagreement about your injury or needed treatment, a QME steps in to provide an unbiased medical opinion. They're like the tiebreaker.
That's a good way to put it. And here's where it gets interesting. QMEs can be reported to the DWC for a variety of reasons. It's not just injured workers or their attorneys who can file complaints. Even judges can flag a QME if they think something isn't right.
Be judges. So if a judge feels a QME isn't doing their job properly, they can report them to the DWC.
Absolutely. For instance, let's say a judge is reviewing a case and finds a QME report to be lacking in thoroughness or supporting evidence. They can, and often do, report this to the DWC. QMEs are bound by a very strict code of conduct, outlined in both state statutes and regulations.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer of accountability. It seems like the DWC is really trying to make sure that QMEs are upholding their responsibilities and providing fair and accurate evaluations. But what happens if a QME does violate this code of conduct? What are the consequences?
The consequences vary depending on the severity of the violation. For minor issues, they might just receive additional education or training. But for more serious infractions, they could face a formal reprimand, suspension, or even be removed from the QME's list entirely.
That makes sense. There needs to be a range of options to address different levels of misconduct. Can you give me an example of what might land a QME in hot water?
Absolutely. Let's say a QME had their medical license revoked or suspended by the Medical Board of California. That's a major red flag, and they would likely be removed from the QME list. Similarly, if they're convicted of a crime related to their medical practice, that could also lead to termination. And believe it or not, even something like failing to pay the required fees to maintain their QME status can result in suspension.
Wow, so they really are held to a high standard. It's reassuring to know there are such strict measures in place to protect injured workers and the integrity of the system. But what about the treating physicians themselves? I mean, they're the ones providing the day-to-day care. Are they also under the DWC's microscope?
That's where things get a bit more nuanced. The DWC's focus is primarily on the administrative and procedural aspects of the system, not on the clinical decisions made by treating physicians. So they don't directly oversee treating physicians in the same way they do QMEs or claims administrators.
So if you had a concern about your treating physician, let's say you suspected fraudulent billing or felt they weren't acting ethically, where would you go with that complaint?
That's a great question. If you have concerns about a treating physician's conduct or billing practices, the DWC isn't the right avenue. Instead, you would need to direct your complaint to the appropriate licensing board, like the Medical Board of California, or to a legal authority, such as the insurance commissioner, the attorney general, or even your local district attorney.
So it's like a division of labor within the oversight system. The DWC focuses on the workers' comp system's rules and procedures, while other entities handle complaints about professional misconduct or illegal activities.
Precisely. Think of it as a system of checks and balances with different players responsible for specific aspects of oversight.
Okay, that makes sense. It's all starting to come together now. But what about employers? Does the DWC have any say in whether they're properly insuring their employees? I mean, that's kind of a big deal.
You're right, it is a big deal. But that's another area that falls outside the DWC's direct authority. Ensuring employers comply with workers' compensation insurance requirements is the responsibility of other agencies, like the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, often called the DLSE, and the Department of Insurance.
So we've got the DWC keeping tabs on claims administrators, UROs, and QMEs. But other agencies are responsible for making sure treating physicians are playing by the rules and that employers are carrying the necessary insurance. It's a complex web, but it seems like the goal is to have multiple layers of protection and accountability throughout the system.
Exactly. The idea is to protect the rights and well-being of everyone involved in the workers' compensation process. It's about ensuring that injured workers can access the benefits they deserve, that employers fulfill their obligations, and that the entire system operates with fairness and transparency.
After this deep dive, I'm starting to see how intricate the California workers' comp system really is. It's certainly more than just filing a claim and waiting for a check. It's a whole process with a lot of moving parts.
It definitely is. And even with all these checks and balances in place, navigating the system can still be challenging. Whether you're an injured worker, an employer, or a medical provider, it's important to understand your rights and responsibilities within this complex system.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially in a system like this. So for our listeners out there who might find themselves dealing with the California workers' comp system, what's the one key takeaway they should remember?
I'd say the most important thing is to be proactive. Don't be afraid to ask questions, seek guidance, and advocate for yourself. Understanding the system with all its checks and balances can empower you to navigate the process more effectively and ensure a fair outcome. Remember, there are resources available to help you along the way.
Speaking of resources, where can our listeners go to learn more? Are there websites or organizations they should check out?
The California Department of Industrial Relations website is a great starting point. It's chock full of information on workers' comp, from basic FAQs to detailed guides on specific aspects of the system. And don't forget the DWC website itself. That's where you'll find the actual forms, regulations, and contact information for various departments.
It sounds like those are the official sources, straight from the horse's mouth. But are there other organizations, maybe advocacy groups or legal resources that could be helpful too?
Absolutely. There are organizations dedicated to helping both injured workers and employers navigate the system. For injured workers, there are groups like the California Applicants Attorneys Association, which can provide referrals to attorneys specializing in workers' comp cases. And for employers, there are organizations like the California Workers' Compensation Institute that offer resources and training on compliance and best practices.
It sounds like there's a whole support system out there for anyone dealing with workers' comp in California. It's not something you have to navigate alone.
Exactly. And remember, information is constantly being updated. Laws can change, regulations can be revised, so it's important to stay current. This deep dive is giving you a solid foundation. But it's always a good idea to do further research based on your specific needs and role in the system.
Couldn't agree more. Whether you're an injured worker seeking benefits, an employer navigating your responsibilities, or even a medical provider working within the system, understanding how it all works is crucial.
It's empowering, really.
hmm
When you understand the system's checks and balances, you're better equipped to advocate for yourself and ensure a smoother, fairer experience. Think of it as having a roadmap when you're traveling in unfamiliar territory. Knowing the landmarks, the potential obstacles, and the resources available to you can make the journey much less daunting.
Well said. I think we've successfully navigated the sometimes choppy waters of the California workers' comp system. We've explored the key players, the oversight mechanisms, and the potential consequences of noncompliance. And most importantly, we've given our listener the knowledge they need to advocate for themselves and hopefully ensure a fair and just experience within the system.
We've also highlighted the importance of seeking out additional resources and staying informed. The California workers' comp system is complex, but understanding how it works can make all the difference.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic, ready to break it down and empower you with knowledge. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, stay well.